Ani Bojo, Norma Dejnakaz, Chichak and Dodum, Nyashingaming and Donjaba, Anishinaabekwe and Dao. My name is Norma Toby, and I am from the Crane clan, and I am an Anishinaabe woman from Nyashingaming. I'm an elected official for the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation, and I am very proud to be here with the fisheries staff, Ryan Lozon, Brianna Redford, to do this presentation. Also joining us is Dr. Erin Dunlop from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. Our presentation is on the project, which consists of partners from Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and the Canadian National Park Service. This project is called Together with Giigoonyag. The Anishinaabe people have the responsibility to take care of the land and water that is our home. The Anishinaabe women specifically have the responsibility to take care of the water through ceremony and feast. Through stories handed down from our ancestors, Anishinaabe people have been able to augment Western science when it comes to understanding Dikameg. With the Indigenous ways of knowing through the Western science, a two-eyed seeing approach was created to understand Lake Huron Dikameg population, habitat use, and migration patterns. The project covers the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which consists of Lake Huron around the tip of the Saugeen Peninsula. Do you want to just show that area? So the project covers the Saugeen Ojibwe territory, which consists of Lake Huron around the tip of the Saugeen Peninsula and into Georgian Bay. The Saugeen Ojibwe Nation territory, known as Son, consists of two First Nations, the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation on the east of the Saugeen Peninsula, and the Chippewas of Saugeen on the west side. The Son territory also consists of treaties 45.5 and 72 between the Son and the federal government of Canada. So we will talk about Son and Dikameg. Since time immemorial, Son has harvested Dikameg for ceremony, trade, and subsistence, leading to the development of a strong cultural connection and understanding of the species. And now I will hand it over to the colleagues.
Thanks very much, Norma. So, what is the story about Lake Huron Coregonid? So, as you can see here in this slide, the total yield of Coregonids has been decreasing. In addition to that, we're seeing decreasing catch per unit effort, as well as increasing mean age of Coregonids as well. So not exactly the feel-good picture that we got from the first presentation today. So hearing from Norma about how important Dikameg are to the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, facing these declines, Son met with Parks Canada, as was mentioned, and the Ministry of Natural Resources to try and figure out what we were going to do about these declines. And really the first step was to try and understand some of those reasons. Why are we seeing these declines, and developing some research to look into that and not only understand what is going on, but also to take that knowledge to be able to create an action plan to figure out how we would address that. And I guess I'll move on to the next slide here, which is the two-eyed seeing approach. So although SON, met with Parks Canada and MNRF, and we had these discussions, we had to figure out how we were actually going to work together, because the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation had, although we, in the fishery science side of things, we were using Western science, which you're all familiar with. You went to school most likely through a Western science system. There is that whole Western science side of things at SON for sure, but as far as the knowledge that's held in the community of Saugeen and Nawash, that knowledge was often gained through a completely different process, which is through this idea of Indigenous knowledge, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, specifically Indigenous knowledge, which is kind of created through that long-standing relationship with those fish. And we had to figure out how we were actually going to bring these two knowledge systems to the forefront so we could learn from both of these knowledge systems. And we ended up landing on this Eptimunk, or the two-eyed seeing approach. And I think that Mi'kmaq elder Dr. Albert Marshall said it best: learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strength of Western knowledge and ways of knowing, and to use both eyes together for the benefit of all. So we weren't just going to use Western science, we weren't just going to use SON knowledge, we were going to have both sources of knowledge to help figure out what's going on. So just a little bit of an overview. We are taking a holistic approach, looking at all the different life stages. We don't have enough time today to go into all the various projects. Dr. Dunlop here will be explaining a little bit more about the larval fish work a little bit later on today. In this presentation specifically, we're going to be focused on SON-based ecological knowledge, so the interviews and mapping, as well as the acoustic telemetry work that we're doing.
All right, thank you. So with our acoustic telemetry part of the project, this is a really large component of the project. We're surgically implanting acoustic tags into fish, and these acoustic tags, of course, emit a unique identification, so a unique code that is then picked up by receivers that are placed on the lake bed. So the receivers pick up the signal from these tags as the fish swim by. So here you can see the red dots up here in the map show the location of the acoustic receivers that we've placed on the bottom of the lake bed. So this is quite a large area that we're covering with this project. And you can see the location of where we've been doing some of the tagging. So you can see we began our tagging in 2020 and we continued that on. And as far as the acoustic receivers go, we first began our tagging in 2020, and we began to put out the receivers on the lake bed. First we started with Georgian Bay in 2021, and then we continued on to the North Channel. And then over the course of the subsequent 2 years, we placed our receivers out in the main basin of Lake Huron. And the intent with this part of the project is to look at the lake-wide movement patterns of lake whitefish. So Lake Huron is divided up into different management zones, and we evaluate the status of stocks in these different management zones, and we allocate commercial fishing quota in these management zones with the assumption that the fish don't travel actually between them. So we wanted to fill some knowledge gaps about the extent to which lake whitefish were moving around the lake. And the exciting thing with this project is it really spurred on other acoustic telemetry projects in Lake Huron. So you can see this map over here. This is the current Great Lakes Acoustic Telemetry Network. And you can see now there's receivers on the US side as well, where they've started a similar project also looking at movement of lake whitefish. So we can now track the movement of our fish around Lake Huron. So it's quite an exciting time. So to date, we've tagged 295 lake whitefish at different spawning shoals around the lake. And we've also tagged some lake trout because we're looking at movement of lake trout as well. Next slide. And just a few findings so far. So we began our tagging, as I mentioned, in 2020, and this was done at the Firehouse Shoal. So this is just off of the Chippewas of Nawash community. So this is a really important spawning shoal to the community. So we tagged 50 fish in 2020, and then we set up a really fine scale acoustic telemetry array actually on the spawning shoal in 2021, so we could look at the fish that were returning. And so you can see here that we actually saw 28 of those original 50 fish return to spawn, and you can see this nice bell-shaped curve that we picked up as well. Next slide. And just very quickly, some of the results. These are really preliminary results from these fish that were tagged at this spawning shoal at Nawash. So you can see the tagging location shown by that arrow. So you can see the movement of the fish. They sort of tend to go down into sort of Georgian Bay. So we have fish going into Owen Sound, for example. And then I'll just note also, you can see the spawning time. So 2021, that's when the fish were returning to spawn. But interestingly, you can see that some of the fish that were tagged there at the original spawning shoal actually didn't go back to that spawning shoal in 2021, but we don't know if those fish skipped spawning or maybe they were spawning elsewhere.
So now that we've looked at kind of the Western approach that we took, I'll shift over to how we incorporated the Indigenous eye in our two-eyed seeing project. So in order to do this, we conducted semi-structured interviews with SON knowledge holders, inspired by methodology set out by Terry Tobias in his 2009 map biography, Living Proof. So in these audio and video recorded interviews, we physically mapped important locations of Dikameg, including spawning shoals, feeding grounds, and harvest events, as well as other things. We also went through a series of questions that looked at Dikameg's interactions with other fish species, as well as different ecosystems. And so in order to connect this verbal information and stories to the actual physical maps, we anchored verbal codes into our audio recordings. And so for every mark, it has a code such as FLW012S, which would indicate that this mark is a fall lake whitefish polygon and spawning ground. And so each code has both an activity and a seasonal factor. So over the course of 2022, we conducted 32 interviews with different individuals, each having 2 interviews about 1 to 2 hours long and producing 1 to 2 maps. So we're currently in the process of going through our kind of secondary analysis and taking the interview audio files and transcribing them into Word documents using both our staff manual processes as well as using Otter AI. And for our maps, we're digitizing them using GIS technology. So we've scanned all of the maps into ArcMap, and we're tracing each mark individually and adding in attribute data using a binary process. And so as what our final product is hopefully going to look like is a series of aggregate maps of all the different information from the participants that we can manipulate to look at specific questions. So as you'll see up on the right here, we actually have a sample of what one of our maps might look like. So this is a map that came out of a master's project by Alexander Duncan, a SON member and previous employee, that looked specifically at using the same interview system to map out different Cisco harvest and feeding, spawning events across the SON territory. And so even though we're still in the initial processes of looking through all of the interviews, we do have a few kind of initial trends and results that are coming through that we're seeing, so we'd like to share those today. So one of the things that we were able to look at talking to knowledge holders was spawning movement patterns. So historically, Dikameg across Lake Huron have spawned in sequence, specifically in the SON territory around the peninsula, starting with shoals becoming active in the southern part of the territory on the Lake Huron side. And as the season goes on, seeing the fish becoming active around the peninsula, going from this part and harvesters following them around to the last area becoming active in the southern part of Georgian Bay. However, in the last few years, a lot of harvesters have shared that they're now actually seeing the Dikameg, rather than spawning and moving around the peninsula in sequence, they're now seeing these shoals become active in sync. And this is an interesting thing that we're also seeing in our tagging operations, as we have several tagging teams positioned in the fall around Lake Huron. Instead of us working kind of back to back, we're now all tagging at the same time. And so one of the things we were also able to look at was spawning habitat preferences. So in Lake Huron, the Dikameg tend to stage before the primary peak spawning season on sandy substrate. So talking to the knowledge holders, they were able to tell us that likely the Dikameg are doing this because they're rubbing their bellies on the sands to loosen up their eggs before moving into the rocky substrate on the shoals to spawn. And finally, I'd like to also share some of the changes I've seen in the diets of Dikameg. So a lot of the commercial harvesters are now seeing an increased frequency of dreisseniid mussel shells crushed up found in the digestive tracts of the Dikameg. And so one of the things they're also able to visibly see is the irritation that it's causing to their digestive system. And also we're able to kind of even pick out when this started occurring based on the body condition of the fish. As a lot of the harvesters, when they first started witnessing these crushed up shells, we're also seeing very skinny, low body condition whitefish. And with that, I'd like to say miigwech. If you're looking for more information on how we've used two-eyed seeing in several of our projects, we have a couple different papers that we've included, including Duncan's on Cisco's. We also have a QR code up here to scan that actually we created a documentary to help share what we're doing with the Together with Giigoonyag project, which gives a little bit more background that we could probably fully go over in this presentation. So miigwech, and we'll take questions if we have time.